we'll learn in this video is what are Azure Functions. We'll create a function that runs on a timer. We'll save data to an Azure table storage. And finally, we'll publish the function to Windows Azure. So first off, what are Azure Functions? Azure Functions is a serverless compute service that enables you to run code on demand without having to explicitly provision or manage infrastructure. So basically, you can have a scheduled task or a Windows service, well, not really Windows service, but a service that runs like when you drop a file in a Dropbox folder or SkyDrive folder, or something that runs on a timer, something that you can call manually that runs, and you don't have to worry about having a server up in the cloud to be able to handle this, and it scales very well. You can use Azure Functions to run code in response to a variety of events like timers, files drops, a web service call, etc. And you can use C#, F#, Node.js, Python, or PHP to create the functions. In this demo, we're going to use C#. To get started using this in Visual Studio 2017, the first thing you have to do is have Visual Studio 2017 version 15.3 or later installed. Make sure you select the Azure development workflow. In this demo, we're going to create a function that runs on a timer. We're going to load the weather from openweather.org, and we're going to check the wind speed. If it's greater than 75 miles an hour, we're going to store it up in Azure Storage. So let's switch to Visual Studio. I'm going to open up a, first off, I'm going to show what I created first off. I created an Azure function. I created a new project. I selected Cloud and selected Azure Function, and I named it Packet Weather Demo. Okay. When it first creates a few different things. First off, in the run function, it has this timer trigger because I selected timer. Or actually, I'm missing a step here. First off, we go back and we're going to select Add New Item. So it didn't have any functions defined when I first created it. So I'm going to create another function, and I have a whole bunch of different options. Once does I can create it whenever like an image gets uploaded to a blob storage or even a different file. It triggers this to happen. We can have you drop something in a queue, you do something on GitHub, HTTP trigger, but I use in this demo, we'll use a timer trigger. And we'll talk about this timer function thing in a second. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. So it uses this cron expression. By default, it's set to run every 5 minutes. The first parameter is seconds, second is minutes, third is hours, days, etc. So if I wanted to create a function that ran every hour, I would just change it to 0 star, /1, etc. and then 3 stars. But if I wanted the function to run, for example, at a specific time, 10 a.m., we would just put 0010 and then the 3 stars. So let's go back to the Visual Studio. So let's talk about the code a little bit. First thing I did was I created an HTTP client. I want my response coming back to be JSON. So all I'm going to do is call openweathermap.org, pass in my zip code and my key, and tell it that I want to get back the string into this variable called JSON, which contains JSON. All right, since I can't make this an async function, what I did was I created a task that will allow it to run this HTTP get string async inside it, and then I told it to wait for this to finish, and then I used JSON.NET NuGet package to deserialize this into the weather data class I created earlier. Then I check to make sure that the wind speed is greater than 75 miles an hour, and if it is, we'll store it in a table storage. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. So first thing you have to do is create a storage account in Azure Portal. Then we will create a class that inherits from the table entity, connect to the storage, ensure the table is created, and then store the data. So let's switch to the browser. We'll go to portal.azure.com. Give it a second to log me in. the browser is loading, let's switch to the code. So what I did is I created a class called Hurricane, because if the wind speeds are over 75 miles an hour, and at least in the US it's called a hurricane. Some part of the world it's called a typhoon. So I can carry it from the table entity class, which is part of the Azure storage table function. This is just basically a NoSQL database. It's not really a rational database, but just a cheap way to store data up in the cloud. So you need to set a partition key, which is basically the table, and I told it I want to use hurricane info. The row key, I'm just using a GUID. Then I'm going to save a couple extra properties. The wind speed I'm going to convert to a string. Wind gust I'm going to convert to a string, and then I'm also going to save the date time that the reading was recorded. Then let's go back to the function class. So in my local settings I have a couple of different things. We have this is created by default. You have the Azure Web Service Job Storage, and this is going to be my storage account, and you can also specify your jobs dashboard. Alright, so let's go back to the function. So the Azure Web Job Storage is needed. You need to set that connection string in the local.settings.json, because whenever it logs to the Azure storage. So let's see if, let this log in now, and we'll come back to it in a second. So for now it's going to run. It's going to get my variable from the config. I have a function called getEnvironment variable, where it's going to use the system.environment.getEnvironment variable. We're going to use the name and the process name, and it will get it out of this local.settings.json file for me. So then I'm going to create my record that I want to store in the database. So now I want to connect to the storage account. I load the connection string that's stored in this Azure Web Job Storage. Tell it to go ahead and parse the connection string for the cloud storage account. Then I'm going to use the cloud storage account to create a cloud table client. Then I'm going to tell it, hey, look, I want you to get a reference to my hurricane info table. If it doesn't exist, go ahead and create it. Then I'm going to tell the table that I want it to execute a table operation of insert of the new record that I created. Okay, so by now it's still loading. Alright, this should be finished loading shortly. So if we run this, I'm going to change the timer to 1 minute just so I don't have to wait 5 minutes between runs. Alright, so I'm going to tell it to run. First thing you're going to see is a little console app window open up with a little Azure Functions symbol, and it's going to tell you everything that it's doing to running. Here's my little function. Just going to show it's running. It says the debugger's listening. My breakpoint should hit shortly. Okay, let's see if the... Here's my thing. So while we're waiting for the breakpoint to hit, because this is also running up in the cloud right now. I'm going to wait for my storage account to pop up. I used the one I created earlier for a previous demo, and you can see the overview shows the location, where it's storing, and sorry that it's being slow right now. I'm going to go right to the access keys function, because that's the important thing I wanted to show you. It should be loaded shortly. Alright, well, while it's loading, my breakpoint hit. So I'm going to create a new HTTP client, wait to get my weather data back. It's going to deserialize the data. The wind speed isn't quite high enough yet, but just to demo creating the saving the data in the table storage, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my drag my cursor inside the if block that only runs conditionally. I'm going to create my date time records, create my storage account, create the cloud table client. It's going to see if the table exists. If it doesn't, it's going to create it. And this is still loading. Let's go back to Visual Studio, and now it's going to insert the record. And wait another minute to check if it should run. And it's running again. So I'll just let this run again. Okay, while we're waiting for this to load, we're going to stop this. And I wanted to show you one other thing, that we have a Cloud Explorer window that you can find up in the View Cloud Explorer. I'm going to open this up. It's going to go ahead and list all my Azure accounts, and it will should show me the storage account that I have, and give us a chance to look at the data that we've saved. So you see my storage account here. And we have the demo account. And my tables. And you can see it's going to query and get all the data. So anyway, this keys page, which isn't loading properly right now, but there's a little, it will show you your access key, and there'll be a little button here to show you your connection string that you can copy into your code and put in there. So I got a couple of records from debugging where you can see that the last one we entered was at 11, at a few minutes ago. The wind was 11 miles an hour, and it had gusts of 9.8 miles an hour. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so we want to publish this to Azure. So let's go back to Visual Studio. I'm going to stop the app, which I did. I'm going to right-click on Publish. I'm going to select Azure Function app. Since I saved my settings already, it's going to republish it right up there. But, here it is. So I could sign in. You could select your subscription, your resource group, app service plan, etc. And then once you set all this information, you can publish it up to Azure. Apparently Azure is having an issue right now, but we could get our connection account. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. In summary, we learned about Azure Functions. We created an Azure function that runs on a timer. We stored data in a table storage, and finally we published to Windows Azure.